Greetings, vinyl community, and welcome to VC Friday. Last week, Rhino Records announced the release in February of a frankly over-the-top project. They're going to do a boxed set super deluxe edition of one of my very favorite albums of all time, Tales from Topographic Oceans. This will be no fewer than 12 CDs, plus a vinyl double LP, plus a Blu-ray with a Dolby Atmos mix of the album. And I'll definitely be picking that up when it appears, but that'll be for the future. Right now, you're going to be hearing a whole lot of people talking about this in advance because that album is a favorite whipping boy for critics, would-be critics, and people who just can't engage in rock and roll that doesn't behave the way they expect rock and roll to behave. So I would invite you to check out my own talk about that album from a few years back, which I will link in the description. And today, instead, I'll be talking about another Yes album, Going for the One, from 1977. And this was an album that appeared after a long gap. Relayer was the previous Yes studio album. That was released in late 1974. And at this time, 2.5 years plus was quite a long gap for a major rock band in between studio releases. So late 74 we had Relayer. February 1975 they put out a compilation, Yesterdays, just a little time filler collecting some of the band's earlier recordings from their first two albums before they had really broken big, and also including the 10.5-minute treatment of Simon & Garfunkel's America, which had previously only been available on a Various Artists sampler, and at that only in Britain. So 75 and 76 was devoted to solo albums and touring. And I also did a video sometime back about the solo albums that came out during that period, when it was agreed that every member of the quintet Yes would do a solo album. They'd all be sort of related. You'd mix them all together and have one enormous Yes album. So after all that, and again, I'll direct you to that previous video in the comments, September 1976, the band did what all big-name rock stars from Britain did in those days. They became tax exiles. They convened in Montreux, Switzerland, to make their next album at Mountain Studios, located in the newly rebuilt Montreux Casino, which you may be aware was famously burned down in 1971 thanks to some stupid with a flare gun, as reported by those noted journalists, Deep Purple, or Peep Durple, or Purple Nurple, or I already did the Purple Nurple thing. That was an older video. So the band at this time did include one actual Swiss member, Patrick Moraz, the keyboard player who had joined for the Relayer album, and who was one of the band members making those solo albums in 75, 76. Well, something went wrong with Patrick Moraz, and there are different stories, but I think the truth is that Yes's management manipulated the ousting of Patrick Moraz from the band so that they could bring back Rick Wakeman, who was the real charismatic star member of Yes. He's the guy who got all the public attention. Patrick Moraz, I think, really got a raw deal because he had worked with Yes in Switzerland while they were putting the songs together, and I think he deserves some song credits on some songwriting credits on the Going for the One album, which he does not get. All he gets is his name included among the special thanks. I think even Steve Howe has conceded that they really should have cut him in on some of the songwriting, but no, that didn't happen. The album was, in much later years, released as a CD that included various bonus tracks from the sessions for the album, and Rick Wakeman is credited as playing on these. They're not really specifically dated, but it's very suspicious that the keyboards are mixed into virtual inaudibility. I think that they've probably used some material that Patrick Moraz plays on, credited it to Wakeman, turned it down so nobody can tell the difference anyway, and there's really been a shameful amount of effort, I think, to erase Patrick Moraz from the Yes story. He was not invited to participate when they did that big Yes Union thing where they combined the two sort of factions of Yes. Anyway, by December of 1976, it was announced to the public that Rick Wakeman was back with Yes. Besides the ouster of Patrick Moraz, I said I was going to be positive. It'll be more positive from now on. Besides the ouster of Patrick Moraz, the release of Going for the One saw severed ties with two other important band associates. Producer Eddie Offord was left out of the equation, with the band themselves handling production and John Timperley acting as engineer. And Roger Dean was brought in to do cover art, as he had for every Yes album since Fragile in 1971. But John Anderson said no. He rejected Roger Dean's cover idea, and Dean was replaced by the design firm Hipgnosis, famous for their Pink Floyd covers. And here is what resulted. Going for the One was packaged in an unusual triple fold, gatefold. And we see a naked fellow standing in front of the Century Plaza Towers in Los Angeles, sort of tilting precariously, with some funny lines that apparently relate to the energy points of the body, according to some systems of philosophy, or maybe it's the chakras, who knows. But more concerning is the fact that he has bubbles floating around his bum. Nobody ever talks about the bubbles. I think those are very concerning. This is not a really appropriate cover for the album, in my opinion. I think it's very weird that they went with this. It doesn't match the feeling of the music at all to me. The working title for the album was The New Yes Album, which implied that it was kind of a successor or sequel to the 1971 The Yes Album. So let's talk about the music itself. Much was made at the time of the fact that while Yes's previous three albums had consisted entirely of lengthy epics, this one was a return to shorter songs. And that's only sort of true. It's true that there's no fully sidelong track here, and they have one song that's under 4 minutes, two songs that are in the 5.5 to 6 minute range, one 8-minute mini epic, and one full-blown epic that takes up most of an album side. So 5 songs on an album. It's not exactly the Ramones. But it does start off with a statement of intent. It starts off with something that says we're going to get a little more rock and roll. And that's the title track, Going for the One, which instead of some sort of spacey cosmic introduction as you usually get with a Yes song, starts with a count-in. It's a very exuberant, high-energy song. The songwriting is credited solely to John Anderson, but obviously the other band members contribute. Steve Howe has a huge input with his multi-layered guitar parts, and it is very busy. The song is even cluttered. Steve Howe's guitar, steel guitar, it's all steel guitar, it's just wailing all over the place. Rick Wakeman has spaced out synthesizer and rocking piano parts. There are phased harmony vocals from Chris Squire and Steve Howe, all fighting for attention in the mix, with Howe probably scoring the TKO. John Anderson's vocal pushes his voice to the very top of its already high range, starting on a high E in both the verses and the choruses. And E is a very important note in this song, forming the pivot between the two unrelated keys of E in the verses and C in the choruses. So we've got some definite sophistication in the songwriting. They're not just staying in a key. They've got some composition going on here. Lyrically, there's a theme of sport and play, images of horse racing and whitewater rafting, and John Anderson poking fun at his own space cadet image by saying that the song needs a punchline, but it's so hard to find in his cosmic mind. Another feature of the song is a long, rhythmically sung series of two-syllable words and phrases, similar to the same tactic being used in past songs like Siberian Katru and The Revealing Science of God from Tales from Topographic Oceans.
Realizing the form of the stone, set hands moving.
The album's second track is Turn of the Century, an exquisite 8-minute mini-epic composed by John Anderson, Steve Howe, and Alan White. Lyrically, the song tells the story of the sculptor Rowan, whose lover dies in the winter cold, prompting Rowan to make a statue of her, which, through the force of his love, comes to life so that they're reunited. This combines elements of Mimi's death from the Puccini opera La Bohème and the myth of Pygmalion with the statue coming to life. And the song begins as a duet for John Anderson's plaintive vocal, accompanied by Steve Howe's rhapsodic, classical-styled guitar playing. Beautiful Spanish classical-style guitar throughout this song, with Wakeman's keyboards gradually creeping in and forming an orchestral backdrop, along with heavenly harmony vocals from Chris Squire. Halfway through, Wakeman takes over with a celestial keyboard interlude, blending with Steve Howe's volume pedal guitar work and rolling timpani from Alan White, and the song climaxes with a heavier return of the main verse melody, with White keeping time on cymbals, the closest thing to an actual drum part in the song. And Steve Howe returns to the classical guitar for a closing extended coda. Very, very beautiful song. Next, it's a return to the more beefy rock and roll for the album. Chris Squire's bass presence on the album seems largely more muted than on the past Yes albums. Not that he isn't clearly present, but there's not so much of that big clanking Rickenbacker tone that we expect from him. Parallels is his only songwriting contribution to Going for the One, and what it is a leftover from his solo album, Fish Out of Water, released during that 75-76 period that Yes was doing all the solos. And this is his turn to shine on this album. Now, just as Chris Squire had used church organ on Fish Out of Water, this track makes prominent use of a church organ from the nearby town of Vevey. St. Martin's Church in Vevey has the organ that Rick Wakeman played, but rather than trying to do an overdub after the fact, they ran a telephone line, or rented a high-fidelity telephone line, and Rick Wakeman literally phoned in his part while the band played in the studio. It's on the track on the album, you hear a little low-volume organ noodling just before the song kicks off in earnest, so you know they're sort of getting ready to synchronize themselves in the studio and in St. Martin's, several miles away. Chris Squire provides a great surging bass lick. On his own album, of course, he sang all the vocal parts. Here we've got John Anderson doing the main vocal with Chris Squire supporting, and Steve Howe also contributing. The John Anderson and Chris Squire combination, their voices were just so well matched. That's such a signature sound of Yes, the harmonies between those two, with Steve Howe filling out the middle. And in this song, there's a cool vocal trio section towards the end where they've got Chris Squire panned to the left, Steve Howe panned to the right. This is my right. I'm sorry, it's not your right. And John Anderson in the middle, all repeating different parts. Still, I can't help wondering what it would have sounded like on Fish Out of Water with no lead guitar. Steve Howe is playing some frenetic lead guitar all over the place on this track, and with Squire handling the lead vocal himself. The Fish Out of Water album just has such an interesting sound world. I'd love to hear how this track would have fit in with that. And I have a feeling I would have liked it better on that album. Good as it is, it's probably my least favorite thing on this album. And interestingly, although of course it's a purely Chris Squire written song, the lyrics use the phrase ever-opening flower, which is a phrase that had appeared in John Anderson's liner notes for Tales from Topographic Oceans.
I woke this morning, love laid me down by the river.
Parallels closes side 1 of the album, and side 2 picks up with the shortest song on the album, Wondrous Stories. This is a happy pastoral acoustic song about a storyteller or bard, and it was picked up as the first single to be released from the album, so here is a German copy of the single Wondrous Stories with Parallels on the B-side. Here is a similar copy from the Netherlands of Wondrous Stories, and a promo copy of the US release, which is stereo on one side with the blue label, and a mono version of the same track on the other side with the red and white label. Which side is the front? They're both the same, it doesn't matter. Steve Howe plays the laúd on this track, a sort of small-bodied Spanish 12-string guitar, which is misidentified in the credits as a Vachalia, which was also played on Your Move from the Yes album. There's a wonderful moment in the track where John Anderson sings the line, As he spoke, my spirit climbed into the sky, and Rick Wakeman illustrates that with a rising synthesizer note. And finally, we come to the album's epic, the 15-minute, 38-second Awaken. Now, this song is based on an arch or mirror form, where the second half of the song reflects the events of the first half in opposite order. If you want to letter the sections A, B, C, and D, it starts with an intro, and then there's A, B, C, and the central section D, so that's the sort of keystone of the arch. Then a repeat of C, no repeat of B, a repeat of A, and a coda, which reflects the intro. The intro itself is a startling flurry of piano notes from Rick Wakeman. This is probably the song that most cries out for a songwriting credit to Patrick Moraz. He clearly contributed some of the ideas, but then Rick Wakeman really puts his own stamp on this arrangement. He has a lot to do with what we finally hear on the final recorded version. The first vocal section, what I just characterized as the A section, has a timeless, floating quality, no beat, and it's based on major ninth chords, which make the music feel suspended in space. It's a piece that was sort of presented earlier by the band on stage as a separate fragment. They were calling it High Vibration. It also went through the title Eastern Numbers, but in the end, it was Awaken. This eventually explodes into the section you might call Awaken Gentle Mass Touch, with a driving Eastern inflected theme in 11/4 time, with vocal chants, heavy percussion, and Steve Howe playing a savage solo on the Rickenbacker 12-string electric guitar. And this leads to what I called the C section, a majestic 3/4 section, starting with the words Workings of Man, with the band cycling through all 12 chords of the cycle of fifths. And that in particular was an idea of Patrick Moraz, which he did recycle on one of his solo albums. This is followed by a hushed middle section, an improvisation featuring John Anderson playing harp and Rick Wakeman on the church organ again, recorded at St. Martin's in Vevey, over a rhythmic ostinato from Alan White's crotales, the little metal bell-like devices, and delicate electric picking from Steve Howe that creeps in. The latter half of Awaken has Yes joined by two choral groups, so that creeps in during this central interlude, the instrumental interlude. The two choral groups are the Ars Laeta of Lausanne and the Richard Williams Singers. So this provides a really, again, celestial kind of aspect to the sound. The full band re-enters for the Master of Images section. I'm calling it that because, again, those are the first lyric lines of the section. And it's a variation of the Workings of Man section from the first half, with the cycle of fifths harmonic underpinning. And this includes a gripping guitar solo again from Steve Howe, somewhat mirroring the one in the first half of the song. But instead of a reprise of the Awaken Gentle Mass Touch thing, there is an organ cadenza, very Baroque sounding, from Rick Wakeman, and a glorious instrumental and choral climax before we return to the opening high vibration verse and a gentle, nostalgic little coda with a blues sign-off from Steve Howe, capping the whole event.
Oh, close to guiding light, awakening a heart.
In order to get the different bass sounds he needed to play this piece live, Chris Squire acquired a triple-necked bass, shades of Spinal Tap, with one neck a standard fretted 4-string, one neck a fretless 4-string, and the third neck a 6-string consisting of 3 courses of octave-tuned strings. And play the songs live they did, because after the album's release in July 1977, the band went out on tour from July through December of the year. They featured Donovan as their opening act. And he gets a page in the concert program. And you also get to see in here all the dates of that 1977 second half of the year tour. And I was there. Some more memorabilia associated with the album. Here is a press kit featuring a fold-out history of the band and photographs of the full band and each member. And here is a songbook for Going for the One in case you want to play along at home. As I mentioned before, Wondrous Stories was released as the first single from the album. This went top 10 in the UK, but did not chart in the US. There was a second single released in Europe that was the title track, Going for the One, and the B-side was an abridged version of Awaken consisting of the first 6.5 minutes of the track. This went to number 24 in the UK, and this copy is a Spanish pressing. The album itself, released in July 1977, went to number 1 in the UK and number 8 in the US. So that is Going for the One. We have gone for the one. Thanks very much for watching. Be well. I will talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now. Don't listen to any critics about Tales from Topographic Oceans.
My music isn't any category. I wouldn't put it in the category of symphonic rock because it's not a good word. Symphonic rock, it sounds like strawberry bricks.